Welcome to Brainfluence. I'm Roger Dooley. Today's guest wrote for Charles Kuralt and produced for NBC. He's worked for the Muppets and MTV. He co-founded, built, and sold a marketing agency. You might have seen him on The Today Show or in the New York Times. He's a best-selling author, an influential marketing expert, and claims to drink more coffee in a day than you'll drink in a week. If you've seen any of Andrew Davis's video work, that claim is entirely believable. In fact, I decided to drink a jumbo energy drink prior to starting this session just so I could keep up. Andrew's a sought-after keynote speaker and with my friend Michael Port has co-authored a new book, The Referable Speaker. Welcome to the show, Andrew.
Hey, thanks for having me, Roger. Thanks for drinking the energy drink. Let's keep them on their toes.
Definitely. Well, I guess I was introduced to your work in a virtual session put on by you and Michael about speaking. It was some free speaker training, and I'm curious, that was all done virtually. This was during the pandemic. We're still in the pandemic, of course, but we are seeing a little bit of in-person events going on now. But what did you learn about virtual presenting and virtual communication?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you, I spend most of my time in front of audiences, presenting in person. And, anyone in the business world spends a lot of time in front of people in conference rooms, chatting, or even just informally. So when all of a sudden all the events and in-person events were canceled, I found myself wondering, how can I create a virtual experience that, is a little different. And the top three things I think I learned were, number one, people come first. And in most virtual environments, people put their PowerPoint slides first instead of the person first. So I tried to flip that and just make it more about face-to-face communication. The second thing I learned was that, pacing and storytelling become more and more important in the online world. The virtual medium is a cold, small medium compared to an in-person, live experience that's 3D. And so it's really important that you can rely on great storytelling methodology and teaching so that you get people engaged, you keep their attention, and they want to know what's going to be next instead of feeling like, well, I hope the next thing is not as boring as this thing. And the third thing I learned was the power of production quality, I think, at the end of the day. I realized pretty quickly, Roger, most people did, that I called it the production paradox. The biggest broadcasters in the world were no longer using studios. Everybody was producing from their home. So, the morning television shows started looking like Zoom calls. Meanwhile, Zoom calls started looking like television shows. There was this kind of dichotomy that went on. So putting a lot of effort into making sure that your production looks good. And on that, I should complain about my own video quality. I'm not in my normal home studio. I don't have great internet connection. And these are things that stress me out when we're doing a virtual thing these days, because the quality matters more than ever before.
Yeah, I enjoyed that transition, watching TV announcers and so on suddenly connecting from home, and some did a very good job right out of the gate, and obviously some had professional folks come out and set up their home studio, but others were really pretty amusing and laughable, and at the same time, none of us are perfect, but you can learn from that. I spent quite a bit of my time in trying to improve my own virtual game by watching what was happening on news shows, not just the announcers. They tended to be pretty professional from the start, but also their guests. So a lot to learn there. And everybody has upped their Zoom game, I think, in the last year.
Well, yeah, your Zoom presence these days is like the old handshake. They used to say, grip a firm handshake, look them in the eye, like that. That was your kind of initial introduction to people. And now it's like, what do you look like on your Zoom camera the instant I see you? Is it just your nose? Is it, do you have a good frame of reference? Those things matter today.
Right, or the green screens where people's hair is appearing and disappearing.
And half of their face disappears. Right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, so Drew, I read Referable Speaker, which I highly recommend to anybody who is interested in speaking, particularly professionally speaking, in one sitting on an airplane, oddly enough, going to your co-author's speaker training in New Jersey. And it's a great book. I'm curious, how did you, Michael Port is known as a speaker trainer, an expert on speaking performance. He's a former actor himself. And you were more of a marketing guy. At least that's what I knew you as, a marketing guy. How did you get together with Michael on that to write this book?
Yeah, well, I think from my perspective, I approach anything very analytically. So I track a lot of things, and just like in any business today, knowing what numbers point to what potential outcomes is a really important part of business. So for the last 10 years or 12 years, I've been tracking hundreds and hundreds of data points about every one of the speaking engagements and inquiries I was getting. And Michael knew that I was very much like this. And Michael, is, like you said, is very much focused on the craft and the entertainment and the insight you can deliver in a performance setting. And we had lots of discussions about whether it was possible to build a formula that incorporated both the kind of analytical mindset and the understanding of how the speaker business works with the artistic and craft side of the business to create a great presentation that people want to watch, that transforms people's minds and changes their minds and impacts their business. And we finally decided, well, let's write a book. That'll be our goal, and we'll go on this journey to figure out if there is a formula that marries both of these things up. And so it was purely a kind of a match of art and science, I guess I'd say. Do the numbers back up the things that we are claiming, and does my experience tell me otherwise, and can we help other people with what we've learned?
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the numbers a little bit. What kind of research went into the book? Because I know that most of the folks in our audience today are evidence-based. They don't want to hear from experts because they're experts or because they have years of experience. They always like to know where the data came from. And I think that's one thing that sets this book apart, where you actually did some research, not necessarily academic quality that's published in a journal, but nevertheless, you guys did some of the heavy lifting to prove your point. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so we did lots of qualitative research. So we interviewed literally hundreds over the course of 2 years, event producers and event organizers of different sizes and scales to understand how they actually determine who they hire for speaking engagements, who they bring in. And then we did some quantitative research on fee increases based on different factors that we had seen in the marketplace. We analyzed up to 40,000 speakers and their fees to determine what the averages were. We even did a survey that we ended up having about 289, I think, survey respondents who anonymously gave their fee insight. So the anonymous piece, I know is important, but we wanted people to be able to feel like they could share freely, and so we started to understand the market a lot better, and then we did a lot of qualitative interviews of speakers as well, and the final bit was we did a ton of watching speeches and analyzing them to try to determine if they had the right elements to be combined to deliver a transformational experience.
So what did you find? Well, first of all, you would say that there are different kinds of speakers, that you have different categories of speakers, and it's important to understand where you are now and maybe
Yes.
Where you want to go if you don't want to be where you are now. So explain that breakdown.
Yeah, so there are four types of speakers. That's what you're referring to, right, Roger? The four types of speakers. Yeah, there are four types of speakers that are you generally hired for an event. And if you're thinking about this in terms of your business or where you work, there's like an analogous set. So the first one is actors, athletes, and astronauts, and those are the people that fill seats. They get paid the big bucks. They're people like Will Smith or Serena Williams or Scott Kelly, the astronaut. You know those people. You don't need a description. And those people are really, really powerful because they get people excited about the event. The second category of people that event organizers hire are called the A-list alternates. And the A-list alternates are essentially people that you don't immediately recognize their name, but as soon as I say the next 4 to 6 words afterwards, you remember. So it would be like Yancey Strickler. You don't know who that is probably, but he was the founder of Kickstarter. And you're like, oh, that sounds interesting. Or it might be, let me think of another good one. I can't even think of another one. Oh yeah, how about Ken Jennings? He was the winningest contestant on Jeopardy. Or it might be the guy who landed a plane in the Hudson, or it might be the guy who won best Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, whoever it is, those kinds of things all of a sudden started to sound intriguing. They cost less than the athletes, actors, and astronauts, but they still have an audience appeal. And the two things you need to know about these first two groups is they provide a lot of entertainment value, and they get people excited about the event, and a lot of times they're really inspirational, which is great. Then the next two categories are the interesting ones for me as well. The next two are the industry icons. These are the people that in a specific industry, everybody wants to hear their opinion. So, I spoke at an event for convenience stores a few years ago. There were 1,000 people in the audience, and the people they all came to see was a woman named Emily Sheets. Now, I don't know who Emily Sheets is. Maybe you don't know who Emily Sheets is, but she happens to be the head of strategy for one of the most innovative convenience store chains in the world, and everybody wants to know what she's doing next. So everybody wanted to hear him. She's an industry icon. Or the other person that was there was the CEO of Domino's Pizza. Everybody, now maybe you don't want to hear him, but everybody else does. So those are the three categories that are really easily booked. The fourth category is the one where most people have an opportunity, and that's the surprise and delight speaker. And they're the person that provides the marriage of entertainment and insights that create a transformational experience for the audience. That's what changes their mind, that has that aha moment, and they actually then leave the session saying, that was the value. That was, I'm going to change my business, or change the way I work, or change who I am as a result of what I just saw there. And so most speakers in the professional speaking world fit into that surprise and delight category. If I can just quickly make a parallel, the parallel in the business world is, you have your CEO of your company, or kind of the executives at the company. Those people fit into that A-list alternates. They're the big wigs, the people that, if the CEO is speaking, I want to hear it. One level down, you have the industry icons, and maybe those are your department heads. Those are the people that, command a lot of respect. They've got a huge amount of knowledge and insight, and if they're going to share their insight, you want to know and hear about it. And at the end of the day, no matter where you are in an organization, you can really be a shining light if you focus on being that surprise and delight presenter at your organization. Whenever you're going to a meeting, even if it's only 7 people, you got to focus on how you can deliver something in that meeting that actually does surprise and delight. Wow, I didn't know that, or that, what a thought, or that was a really great story. It's changed the way I think about what we're discussing today. You want to be the surprise and delight person. You don't need the stature or the expertise of the other categories to feel like you're making an impact.
Well, it's probably fair to say, Drew, that very, very few of our audience members are in those first few categories. They're probably not astronauts or famous actors or athletes or football coaches and so on, and probably not even CEOs of a Fortune 50 corporation. But hopefully we've got maybe 1 or 2 of those in the audience. We'll see.
I'm sure they're there.
Everybody else, as you say, is really in that surprise and delight category, or they should be in that category. Maybe if they're speaking and they're not surprising or delighting, then that's that's something else entirely. How do you produce that surprise and delight if you're a speaker, regardless of the audience size?
Yeah, well, the first thing I think people should always think about is to ensure that they're delivering something that challenges conventional wisdom. So before we even talk about how you want to present in a meeting or pitch a presentation, or maybe you're in sales and you pitch a lot, the first thing I want you to think about is the message you're delivering. And if it's just conventional how-to content, if you're training people, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you really want to challenge people and get them thinking, you actually have to challenge some conventional wisdom. Maybe if it's in the corporate setting, it's, hey, we've been doing this X, Y, and Z the same way for 100 years. Why have we been doing that? Let's challenge that conventional wisdom and think about something new. And there are lots of brands and innovations that have come out of just anyone in the organization, just asking a question, challenging some conventional wisdom, and then helping go on the journey to solve that problem or challenge that wisdom and find a new way to do things. So the first thing I want you to do is think about that visionary mindset. Even no matter where you are in the organization, if you're in the front lines, you're customer facing, you should be thinking that way because you're closest to the consumer. And if you're a C-level executive and you're listening to this, I want you to think about what conventional wisdom in your industry should you and your team challenge. Now, again, you do not need to have the answer. Do not look for the answer. Most great speakers and presenters and pitchers don't have the entire solution. All they have is a really good question that sends people on a quest. And I can tell you a quick story, actually, about a company called Tetra Pak. that was actually founded a long time ago, right after, like in the early 30s. It's a company that was founded by a Swedish man who came to the United States, and he saw that packaging was changing and transforming. And that no longer would you go to a grocery store in the old days. You'd just walk in and you'd ask people to serve you, right? And then you walk away with a bunch of packaged stuff. Well, in the 20s, that started to change, and they started putting the products on shelves outside, and it was self-service. And the Swedish man noticed this, and he thought, this is interesting. I want to get into the packaging business. So he got into the packaging business. He was making lots of cardboard packaging in Malmö, Sweden, and he had a very successful company. And then World War II came along, and the company suffered a little bit. All of his chief engineers that were coming up with new packaging, they got conscripted into the army, and he was left with one engineer in his team who wasn't eligible for the military. He was kind of the runt, let's call him, of the engineers. He had eyesight problems, he had a physical issue, and every day the founder of Tetra Pak would walk in and say, I have one question for you. How can we create packaging that is just as safe as glass, holds just as much as glass, but costs less as glass for liquid? So he asked the same engineer the same thing for almost a year, and as the company was about to go out of business, they were losing hope. He couldn't come up with a solution. And just that one question, sharing that one question, getting the one engineer left constantly thinking about this same problem to go on this journey for a new answer, resulted in success. At the end of the day, it was Christmas Eve, 1944, and this engineer ended up having food poisoning, and he was in the bathroom, and he ran out of toilet paper, and he took off the cardboard roll as he was kind of miserably sitting there on Christmas Eve doing work, hoping to save the company, and he pinched the ends of the toilet roll, he twisted it, and squished it a little, and all of a sudden he realized he had his answer. That is the Tetra Pak. Today, the Tetra Pak company is the world's largest packaging company, doing about $48 billion in packaging every year, and their staple product still, 70 years later, is the Tetra Pak. So there you have it. You got to send people on a visionary journey, let them do the work for you to try to answer a question no one else has tried to answer.
And I guess that question would vary depending on your level in the organization yourself, or the type of people you're presenting to. If you're presenting to, say, frontline customer service representatives, you're probably not going to pose a question that is affecting the entire industry that they have absolutely no control over or input into. But you might question perhaps the way they are working, the way business is being done, the way they're treating college, or whatever. In some, but your point is that it has to be a little bit counterintuitive to get some traction. That if you're just going to tell them be nice to customers or whatever, okay, yeah, we get that, we know that, we know we're supposed to do that, and you're really not going to be compelling.
Yeah, look, I think employees today want to feel like they're part of something. And, yes, you can absolutely get your team involved and engaged by asking them, focused questions for that team. But some of the best and biggest innovations, as well as some of the best companies to work for, have come out of the team, the entire team. It doesn't matter if you're in accounting or your customer service, focusing on answering one big question. So even Domino's Pizza is another great example. The CEO of Domino's Pizza in 2008, he said, we're not in the pizza business, we're in the pizza experience business. And every day he came in and asked the entire company, what is a pizza experience? And they're like, I don't know, I thought you were going to tell us that. And he said, no, you need to help answer that. What is a great pizza experience? And so he left it up to anyone on the front lines. You might be working at a Domino's Pizza store. If you know what you think a great pizza experience is, I want you to call the CEO. Give me an idea. Let's go for it, right? So I think people want to feel like they're listened to and they're heard, and it's really important as a presenter that you challenge the same thing over and over again in a way that makes people feel like they're part of something bigger.
Drew, the title of your book is Referable Speaker, and the key word there is referable, because your finding is that speakers get gigs, whether particularly the better gigs, almost solely via referrals, either by another event manager or coordinator or booker, or perhaps somebody who saw, an executive who saw a particular speaker and said, wow, we need to get that person. You know, as a speaker myself, I am inundated with people on LinkedIn saying, hey, we will drive you new speaking leads every day, you know, with our great targeted outreach program and so on. I haven't actually tried any of these folks, but really what you would probably say is that's the wrong approach. You don't want to be dumping people randomly into a funnel, even if they are in fact event managers and such, because if they are not familiar with you, if they haven't heard of you from another source that they trust, chances are they're not going to hire you, at least not for any kind of important gig. Was that? Why don't you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So this is a part of the research that we leveraged was actually research done by Speaker Inc. They did a research project to see how event organizers chose their keynote speakers, and there were, I think the final list had something like 18 or 19 ways that they did do this, but the top 3 ways, as you suggest, were all referral, and it was exactly what you said. Number one way that they get their speakers is an executive at their company saw the speaker and said, get this speaker, right? That's the number one way. The number 2 way is that an executive at another company saw the speech, told the event organizer at this company that you were great, and then all of a sudden you get the speech. And then the final way is that the event organizer themselves saw you speak. So the top 3 ways to get a gig is by referral. Other things that are on that list do include things like you were talking about. There is outbound outreach. Yes, sometimes that happens. There's YouTube, there's Google search. But the top 3 ways, the easiest ways, are by referral. So and just like any business, the most successful businesses, the easiest way to acquire a new customer, the lowest cost way, is to have a great referral. And walk a new customer right in the door. And so focusing on the marketing of your business or of your speech is something that can help you. But the number one thing you need to have is a speech that is referable, that when people see it, they say, man, that was amazing. I want that for my audience. And if you can deliver that, you will have a never-ending long line of stage-side leads, we call them. Stage-side leads are just leads that come from a previous gig. For me, it's within 72 hours. And so my goal, the only way I measure my speaking impact is by the number of stage-side leads I get. My goal is to get 4. Right now, I average about 3.78 or 88 per gig. And,
so close.
But I just went back on the road for the first time since the pandemic started, and at my first engagement, I only got 2 stage-side leads. So there, but I know that means there's a lot of room for improvement right now. I've got to get really back into it and get my speech better so that I can get those stage-side leads.
Well, it might be you, and it might be the audience too. Perhaps some audiences simply aren't of a nature that are going to generate a lot of leads. But I think probably everybody's a little bit rusty after being away from in-person events for so long.
I think it's me. Look, I'm very cautious, and I think this is a great lesson for anyone in any business. It's very easy to blame the audience or the customer. It's not the right audience. And I did this when I first started speaking. I would say, well, they're not really my audience. They're not the decision makers. I don't think. And it's easy as a marketer to say, well, the reason we're having trouble getting traction right now is we haven't found our audience, or the people that are coming to us are too junior, they're not the right people. I get that, but I think it's more important if you focus on what you're doing first, because that refocuses the energy and effort on things you can control. And you're right, there are audiences that have very low stage-side lead potential. For example, if I speak at a corporate event, meaning it's just for this company, right? It's Andrew Davis Inc., and I'm speaking at Andrew Davis Inc., that means all those employees have already heard me speak, and it's very unlikely they're going to come back to their company and say, you got to hear Andrew speak. So, as a result, I make sure that I charge a high fee for those events, because I know that the referrals from those events are going to be very low, if at all, versus other events where there are hundreds of company attendees from different companies. That's where I know I can get my 4 stage-side leads potentially out of that event within 72 hours, have more business.
So Drew, describe your personal journey as a speaker from your starting point to now getting 3.8756 leads per gig.
Well, yeah, my personal journey, I so I ran a marketing agency for a long time. I sold it in 2012, and I took some time off. And my wife said, "Look, you can't watch Judge Judy all day long. You probably should find a hobby or something." And although I was pretty happy watching Judge Judy marathons. And so she said, "Look, you keep getting these inquiries to speak," because I had spoken a lot as a lead gen tool for our business. I'd just written a book called Brandscaping when I left the agency and sold it. So she said, "Look, take some of these speaking gigs, just go out on the road, and it'll get you fresh again. You can go do, you can see the world." So I started doing that and started realizing that it was really fun. But in the first year, I started analyzing, the business after 1 year of speaking, and it turned out I was making like an average of like $16 or $18 an hour. And it wasn't that profitable, but it was a lot of work. And I thought, man, maybe I'm not cut out for this speaking. But what I did was I went back to what I knew as a marketer. Let's go dive into the data. Let's look at what's worked, where those gigs that I did get were coming from. Look at how much they were, buying my service for, and reevaluate and try one more year, but with a much more strategic approach instead of just taking every event that came my way. And it didn't take very long to do the analysis to realize that, the best paying gigs were the ones that had already seen me speak. And after I knew that and started tracking, I built my own little system to start tracking all the data. So I've done that since 2014. I've been tracking hundreds of data points to try to figure out what has the biggest impact, what kind of next gig is going to be the most profitable next gig. And very quickly, by the end of that year, I realized this is a really viable business, and I've kind of cracked the first step in understanding how this business works. And it's been really, really fun since then. I also took on, in 2015, I worked with 6 other speakers, and I tracked all of their data. So I think it's, in just that 1 year, it was 770 inquiries to speak. And so we analyzed all that data and putting the book together to try to figure out, what works and what doesn't. And, some speakers that I took on were very successful and others weren't. And you could see in the numbers and in their speeches what wasn't working. So it was really helpful.
What changes did you make to what you were doing, Drew?
Well, number one, I focused on the product first. So, the product is the speech, the marketing is all the cake. And I think a lot of people could use some work focusing on their product or their service before they start worrying about the marketing. And as soon as I started focusing on the speech first, I noticed a direct correlation in the speeches I was delivering. The second thing I did was I started customizing the sessions less, which I know is counterintuitive for a lot of speakers and maybe not for your audience. But if you're providing a custom solution to your audience each and every time, it's very, very expensive to do on your part, but it's also hard to refer because it was such a custom solution. It's hard for people to say, I don't know if it'll work for your business, but it worked for mine. And in the speaking business, referability is heavily dependent on your ability to reliably deliver a similar experience for each and every audience. That doesn't mean you don't customize some things. It just means you can't customize everything, because people in the audience say, if you're sitting there thinking, should I hire Roger for my next event? And you've customized the whole thing for funeral directors, but then the person in the audience, is working in the banking industry. They're saying, there are a couple points Roger makes that I think would be great for my audience, but most of it is too much for this audience that I can't see it ever working. So you got to strike this balance between customizing your presentation and reliably delivering it. And I think the last thing I realized is you need something that people will talk about. And from a marketing perspective, Roger, you know this as well, I know, but in a speaking engagement, the one thing you need to increase your referability is called a signature bit. And a signature bit is like the 5 to 7 minutes that both are entertaining and insightful and kind of drive home one of the main points in your presentation so that everybody sees that signature bit and they talk about it. And the talk about it is the key, right? Like, you want to be able to give everybody something that when they go back to their office, they say, oh my gosh, I saw this amazing presenter. Roger was so funny. He had this amazing bit about a chicken and the thing, and it was so funny. It was really well put together. And the whole message was, X, Y, Z. That's when people go, oh, that sounds fantastic. I wonder if they can speak at our event. So having a signature bit, reliable delivery, and focusing on the product were the key decisions I made very quickly. And over the years I've learned other things, but those are the main 3 that I think that were really helpful.
Drew, what's a signature bit? Either an example from your own speaking or somebody else's?
Well, there you can let's see. Comedians are really good at this. George Carlin, has his the 7 words you can't say on television. That's an old one for you youngsters out there. You can look that up. It's not safe for work, but just check it out if you want to see a good signature bit from a comedian. Or Eddie Murphy's ice cream truck. Comedians are really good at finding a happening on a signature bit and then turning that into something special. And for me, I have one that's called Meatloaf. I call it Meatloaf, but it was one of my early signature bits. It's the first one I actually successfully completed, and has been unbelievably successful for me. And it's basically a 7-minute journey on the internet, searching for a picture of Meatloaf, and it ends up going haywire. Think of it as your favorite band's hit song. And if you went to the concert and they didn't play it, you'd be really disappointed. That's what a signature bit is. So, I've been asked to come back and speak at events where I did the Meatloaf thing, and people will say, "Oh my gosh, I remember you did that Meatloaf thing. Are you going to do the Meatloaf thing? I hope you're doing the Meatloaf." And when I tell them, "No, this is a different speech," they're like, "No, I wish you were doing the Meatloaf thing." It's a really big blessing to have a great signature bit. But it also it's a double-edged sword. You've got to be able to deliver the next signature bit that they say, that was even funnier than, or better, or more emotional than the last one.
Great. Well, we could go on forever, I think, Drew, but how can people find you and your ideas online?
Oh, the best way to find me is I do a YouTube series called The Loyalty Loop. I do it every single Thursday it comes out. So you can find me on YouTube. Just search for Andrew Davis Loyalty Loop. Or you can go to loyaltyloopers.com and sign up for that. Or you can find me on Instagram and Twitter and I'm at Drew Davis here.
Perfect. Well, we will link to those places, to the book at Amazon, and also we'll link to your co-author's website, Michael's website as well. And that will all be on the show notes page at rogerdooley.com/podcast. We'll have audio, video, and text versions there as well. So, Drew, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. This was great.